Ladies and gentlemen, kicking off the first stop on his world tour, our new president and prophet, Russell M. Nelson! You say you want some revelation, well, here you go. It's gonna blow your freaking mind.
Welcome to the podcast. Great to have you on.
Yep, I'm excited about this very first episode of our Mormon News Roundup.
Right. This is the Mormon News Roundup. This is a brand new podcast. This is our first ever episode. Right now, we're keeping things anonymous. So my name is Dives, and that's spelled D-I-V-E-S, and I'm joined by my co-host, Al.
Yep, this is Al coming from the west side and meeting up with Dives on the east side.
Yeah, that's correct. Right now, we're keeping things anonymous. Maybe in the future, we'll use our real names, but I don't know about that. We're building a website that's going to go with Mormon News Roundup soon. That has some costs associated with it. I didn't really realize there's web hosting costs, and there's a bunch of other costs that are associated with that. But we plan on pushing this podcast out to iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and maybe even eventually YouTube. We've also started a Patreon that's on Mormon News Roundup. If you go to Patreon, search for Mormon News Roundup, that'll help us get this podcast going. And I want to discuss the purpose of this podcast while we're on it. I've always been a news junkie. Always been a news junkie ever since I can remember. I just have all the news apps on my phone, and I just love following the news. And I was I'm still a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, a member of record, but I don't really go every Sunday anymore. But and so I really kind of miss all of that Mormon news that I was really associated with. And so I went out and looked out there, and I said, is there any podcasts or any newsletters or anything out there that will give me a weekly Mormon news update? And there were a couple of them, but they weren't really what I was looking for. One of them was more deep dives, and another one was, the hosts are talking about, their Stake Roadshow and kind of not really national, very, very local stuff. And
wow, are roadshows still a thing?
On this podcast, it was. I'm exaggerating just a little bit, but yes, it was extremely local. So I wanted to start a podcast. So I want to keep up with the Mormon community, and I still want to be a part of it, even though I'm not going every single Sunday. Hey, this is who I am, and this is where I come from. So I just want to give a little bit of bio for myself, and then maybe Al, you can give some bio for yourself too. I was born into a faithful LDS family in the 1970s. I grew up in and around Salt Lake City, Utah. I graduated from high school seminary. That's 4 years for our listeners who don't know. That's 4 years of attending a seminary 1 hour per day from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, usually before school. I served a full-time 2-year mission to the Eastern States, where when I was 19 years old. I was a full-time missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I graduated from 2 degrees from Brigham Young University. I married a faithful LDS woman in the Mount Timpanogos Temple in American Fork, Utah. And I've served in a variety of church callings, including Sunday school teacher, home teacher, primary pianist, scoutmaster, Sunday school president, member of the orchestra of Temple Square. Oops, that's not the name of it now. They changed the name of the orchestra Temple Square now, but that's what it is. And also, I was a member of the Mormon Choir of Washington, D.C. So I worked either full-time or part-time for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in one capacity for another in paid positions for almost 24 years. So I'm still a member of record. I have 4 children, and I currently reside outside of Washington, D.C. So Al, do you want to tell us a little about, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Let's see. So, my background, let's see. I was raised as born in the covenant, child of record. Let's see. I've got several siblings. They're all faithful members of the church. I was a faithful member of the church myself up until, I was about 30 years old. But even so, I've really tried to help bridge the gap between people who are LDS and people who formerly were LDS. So, I still have a really good relationship with most of my brothers and sisters. There's a couple of them I've become estranged from, but I'm still, I haven't given up on them yet. And by giving up on them, I don't mean giving up on trying to lead them astray or anything. Talking about giving up on them, I'm not going to give up on trying to have a good, healthy relationship with my siblings. Similar to you, Dives, I didn't realize we had so much in common. I mean, we both went to BYU, both served missions.
Go Cougars.
Yeah, that's right. It's amazing we didn't cross paths somewhere in the past, but presently I'm still out in the western part of the United States, so I'm able to be very close to the current events of Mormondom, as it were. And I'm still very interested in it, as it still impacts my life very much, regardless of my status with the church or the standing. But I hope that we can, going forward with this podcast, help to create a dialogue between members and former members, so that we can help maintain those relationships, because I think it's just really sad when when people leave the church, they leave behind a lot of friends and the family, and it can be really difficult, but hopefully we can find a way to figure the way forward for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Al. And, we want this podcast to be opening for true believing members, as the TBMs, former members, or people who are never been a member before and are just interested in the happenings of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We want this to be a very welcoming space for all listeners. So basically the tagline of this podcast is, its name is Weekly Mormon News Roundup, or Mormon News Roundup, and its tagline is Ruminations on the Great and Spacious Beehive. And that's a little insider joke there. There's a passage in the Book of Mormon that talks about the Great and Spacious Building, which is one of the very first the first protagonist in the Book of Mormon has a dream, and he sees a great and spacious building, and the great and spacious building is filled with all kinds of evil and wicked people, and we're substituting with a great and spacious building with the great and spacious beehive, because the beehive stands for the beehive is like the church's symbol. That's also a reference from the Book of Mormon, because of the Deseret Kingdom. The beehive. Yeah. Beehive represents Utah, so it's just a tongue-in-cheek reference there, a slightly irreverent reference to ruminations on what's happening in the church. So it's basically a weekly Mormon news roundup, where we will, hopefully be entertaining podcast designed to be appealing to everyone. And we're going to comb the internet every week to bring you the best LDS-related news, insightful insights that you're not going to find anywhere else. So you're not going to find these. Well, the news articles that we're going to go through about 10 news articles per week or so, maybe an hour-long podcast. And these aren't the news articles that you're going to find on churchofjesuschrist.org. An apostle, dedicates a temple in Brazil. That's not necessarily the news that I'm really looking for. I'm looking for more of the, I would say, more interesting or even slightly controversial Mormon news that is out there. Does that make sense, Al? Are you with me?
I am with you, and we've got a couple of really good examples coming up this week. Things like I found an article about where the Black people ended up being buried in the Salt Lake Cemetery, and I think you'll be really interested about that story.
Okay, let's jump right in there. That's the basic overview of what we're looking for. And again, if you want to get in contact with us, we're at MormonNewsRoundup@gmail.com. Now, eventually, we're going to move that to a domain. We're hoping for MormonNewsRoundup.com. But we'll have to wait on that. But if you want to get in touch with us, if you have news articles that you want us to go over, or if you want to be a co-host or just get in touch with us, then send us an email, MormonNewsRoundup@gmail.com. And there's two N's in that, MormonNewsRoundup@gmail.com. So once you dive into and we're going to post all of these. Eventually, we'll be able to post all these show notes. It's going to be pushed out. You'll be able to see all the articles that we're going to be discussing, so that you can look them up yourself. But do you want to go ahead and jump into your first article, Al, and let's see what's going on out there?
Yeah, will do. I'll just jump right into that. The one about this cemetery, because I thought it was quite fascinating. The Salt Lake City Cemetery, as this article points out, is the largest municipal controlled cemetery in the United States. It's covering 126 acres, I believe. It's a huge cemetery, and this is where like the pioneers that crossed the plains were buried. This is where the former prophets were buried, and the apostles. And it's a really big cemetery. This is located up in the Avenues. Now there's two big cemeteries in Salt Lake City, and the other one, and I'm really gonna kick myself right here because I can't remember the name of it. It's Mount Olivet, I believe.
Yeah, I believe that's correct.
Yeah, Mount Olivet just barely came to me. And that one's located more up by the university. So if you comb through the Salt Lake Cemetery, you'll find a lot of different sections. There was a section for Chinese people, the Japanese that came and settled. And there was even some different sections for different faiths, but other faiths did come later on to settle Utah alongside the saints. And so they had to find a place where they could bury their dead, and that's why there's kind of this division there. But even former black members of the church, yeah, you won't find them in the Salt Lake Cemetery. You'll find them over in the Mount Olivet.
Oh, so there's even though there's a LDS section of the Salt Lake City Cemetery, even if you were a black member, even in pioneer times, who was a member of record, baptized, lived your whole life, you can't be buried in that cemetery.
Exactly, Divesh.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting to me.
Yeah.
I don't know. I wonder if it's common practice for different the what makes I think the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints a little bit unique is that a lot of faiths were more Southern Baptist. Those congregations were virtually either all white or all black.
Yeah.
Now, but obviously early in the church, most of the congregations were white. But as you look at the church, even in its earliest time frame, occasionally you would see a mixed membership. Not always, but a mixed membership, much more, I think, than an average denomination would.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that there was a segregation in where you're going to be, even though, remember that was Utah a slave state?
Utah, to begin with, they were headed in the direction of being a slave state.
They were headed in the direction of being a slave state. That is correct. So they definitely, you think, well, and remember the statements from Brigham Young, that he believed in slavery because he believed in the Bible. Brigham Young was an extreme literalist when it came to the Bible. There really was an Adam and Eve, and the Bible says what it says. It means what it says. That's the quote. It means what it says, and it says what it means. So, as an extreme literalist of the Bible, he believed in the principle of slavery, and there were slaves in the Utah territory. There weren't very many of them because there weren't very many black members in the Utah territory in this time frame that we're discussing. But I'm not surprised at all that those people would be kind of given be off to the side based on Brigham Young's statements.
Yeah. So, anybody that's either in the state of Utah or coming to visit the state of Utah, this is a great place to go and visit. These two cemeteries, first of all, you'll be able to see the graves of all the, former prophets in the Salt Lake Cemetery and the pioneers that crossed. But also by going through this Mount Olivet Cemetery, they have a big Catholic section. So they have like all the priests and nuns all lined up in a row in their section, but they've got all these other ones. They've got several mausoleums and tombs throughout. Really beautiful cemeteries and full of history. My wife and I would love to go for drives and look at old cemeteries and see what kind of stories we can come across while we're going through there. But it's just kind of surprising to see what you can learn from a couple of tombstones.
Yeah, it is. I'd love to come and visit that cemetery and specifically look for the gravestone of Spencer W. Kimball, because he had a great impact in my life. That's something that we're not going to be able to get into here. But thanks for bringing up that article. Let me move on to another one. And this is a more of a we're moving from the sublime to the ridiculous now. And that's this article. The headline is "Former Mormon who forged a new career as an OnlyFans star after leaving the church says that she's been exiled by family and friends after her raunchy photos were outed to the local community." Now, for those of you who are not in the know, OnlyFans is a subscription site that deals with pornography. You have a subscription, you have a star or someone on there who is you either have personal access to that individual's either in videos or photos or in other circumstances. So she says she's been exiled, and when you look at the pictures on this news article, it is absolutely ridiculous because it shows her in pioneer garb, like fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints garb, juxtaposed to her pictures, her they call them raunchy pictures that she posted on Instagram and on OnlyFans. You want to talk about a juxtaposition, and the average person has absolutely no context for what is going on in this article. They're like, what? We went from FLDS prairie dresses to OnlyFans? This is outrageous.
That's quite shocking.
And that is what is amazing to me is we are, this weekend is the general conference, the 192nd general conference of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which they get together twice a year. All of the members get together. We're not going to be able to get into that particular general conference as much during this podcast. We might talk about that in the next one because I don't think we have time. But there was more news articles for this woman, Skylar, than there was on the biggest Mormon conference that has happened in 3 years.
Wow.
Yeah, when you search for Mormon, you get about 20 hits on general conference. You get about 200 hits on this. So
this is big news.
this is big news. It's incredible. So what is amazing to me about this particular article is it shines a light on the church's practice of not removing members out of the church when they have obviously mentally or physically left the church. So you're never going to see an article like this for like an Amish person doing it. Why? Because as soon as they leave the church, they're not the Amish church or the Mennonite church or another. They're not members of that church anymore. When you leave Amish, that's it. You're not Amish anymore. It's not like, this person's still Amish. Well, this person, Skylar, never removed her records from the church, even though she obviously is disaffected and has nothing whatsoever to do with the church anymore. But she's still considered a Mormon.
That's right.
She says that she's being slut shamed by the women in her community. But the question I have for you, Al, is what do you think is going to happen? Do you think that posting risque photos on a subscription site that is basically only for subscribers, this isn't for children, this isn't just on the internet, is that grounds for removal of your records? They used to call this excommunication, but they do not call it any excommunication anymore. They call it removal of your records. Is this grounds for removal of her records, posting risque photos of her doing this, that, and the other?
Wow, Dives, that is that question would be answered differently depending on which bishop you talk to, I think. And that's that's not to say that the church isn't uniform and universal. It's just that's how the church works, is they really leave the disciplinary actions up to the local clergy. So I mean, there are some bishops where absolutely she would have her records removed and as a disciplinary action. There's other bishops that would try to work with her, that would try to get her to stop. I don't know if there's any bishops out there. I'm not sure what the current handbook of instruction says. If she could still remain a member in good standing, or even a member in not good standing, with an OnlyFans and being so open about it. So
yeah, that's an interesting question, and that's what they call the bishop roulette. The decisions of who retains membership is kept at a very local level. And I think that's done for a number of reasons, but one of which is they don't really want senior leaders of the church, speaking about general authorities or area authorities, 70s, or the senior leaders of the church, to really get their hands dirty in these little tit for tat. That's kind of, maybe that was the wrong phrase for this particular article, but in these little skirmishes, they want them to be above the fray. So it's really, you're right. It really is just going to depend on what her bishop says. But these photos that she's posted, they are risque. But posting a risque photo on the internet, does that really mean that you need to be kicked out of the church? That's the question.
It's a tough question, because these are things that people who are baptized into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints covenant to stand as a representative of the church and its
Right. That's
teachings.
true.
So, on the one hand, it really is a matter of bishop roulette where it could go either way. It
Yep.
could be just a matter of, well, is she interested in keeping her membership status? And, to be honest, I don't think that people would really care if she wasn't a member anymore. I mean, she could go on to OnlyFans and call herself a Mormon, whatever she wants to call herself. But or call it Mormon OnlyFans, but you can do that without being a member of the church, and it just seems to me that to be respectful to the church, she probably ought to remove her records if she's going to engage in that kind of activity. And maybe that kind of ruins the allure for some of her clientele.
That's the thing is when you say I'm a Mormon on OnlyFans, is that going to drive traffic to you? Is she utilizing her church membership for monetary gain? And in the meanwhile, which would be against the church's principles, she's utilizing her former membership or current membership, as the case may be, for monetary gain in a way that is not in conformity with the church's current standard.
True.
So that's why I think that the church could certainly be involved with the situation. But we'll see how we'll follow this one. I want to see what the resolution, because now that it's been all over the news, I mean, all over the place. There's the church has the Strengthening Church Members Committee, and that's the big committee up at Salt Lake City that combs the internet, Facebook, Instagram, and all these other places, and looks for members. This was acknowledged by senior church members, including Elder Jeffrey Holland, who said that the Church Strengthening Church Members Committee does in fact exist, and they forward those things onto the local bishops at the local levels so that the bishops can be able to take action if they so desire. So I wouldn't, I would imagine that this has already come to a local leader's attention.
I'm sure it has, yeah.
Okay, that's good on that one. We'll leave that one alone. You had a registered sex offender news one?
Gentleman up in, and I don't want to even give this guy the recognition by referring to him by his name. So gentleman up in the state of Minnesota got himself put in as a bishop of his ward. And he was a registered sex offender. Nobody checked his record. And it's not like it was a secret. He didn't tell anybody, which I guess could be considered a violation of his parole or his, sometimes they are. It depends on state to state, whether you're mandated to go and report to all your neighbors and tell everybody that you are a registered sex offender. And some people don't do that. So one way or another, this guy got put in. Let's see. Wait, I don't think he was put in as a bishop. I think he was put in as a elders quorum president.
Yeah, that I believe that's what it says. That he was put in as an elders quorum president.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is considered a leader. Would be maybe let's say third or fourth in charge of a local Mormon congregation, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So I thought that there was a federal thing that you had to register as a federal sex offender, and that at any time you can search a federal database and see where the registered sex offenders are around. Is that not a thing?
It still is a thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So even whether it's local or not, the people around him would be able to look him up and say, hey, why, this guy is on the sex offenders list.
Yeah. And that's exactly how he got found out.
Right. So the question, how is this individual appointed to this position? How does that occur?
Well, okay. So when the church is very clear that bishops need to prayerfully consider who they're going to call for these positions. So he'll and for an elders quorum, let's see. I'm trying to remember. Is an elders quorum president appointed by the stake president because it falls under Melchizedek priesthood?
You could be right about that.
Because I know that the bishop calls the Aaronic priesthood leaders.
Yeah.
But I believe that the stake president's in charge of calling the Melchizedek priesthood leaders.
The more that you say that, the more that I think that you're right. So a stake president would be over multiple He'd be the equivalent maybe of like a
Mhm.
of an archbishop in the Catholic faith over multiple congregations.
Yeah. So, but even so, I'm sure that stake presidents rely heavily on the recommendations of the local bishops because the bishops are more involved with the individual members of their ward.
Right. And
Yeah.
as elders quorum president, though, he wouldn't necessarily be in the position to be around children very much. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, this really isn't as black or well, it's not as dark gray as it could be, right?
Mhm.
but it's definitely gray.
Well, I mean, it brings up the point. Look, if you drive for Uber, if you drive for Lyft, if you even drive for DoorDash, that's where you pick up the food and deliver it to people. Every single one of those organizations does an $8 background check on the people who are going to be employees for that organization. It's only $8.
Mhm.
But the church, to my knowledge, does not background check anyone, not just the elders quorum presidents, but the people who are directly associated with children in the primary, in the Sunday school, in the Boy Scouts. There's no background checks for anyone anywhere.
I've never heard of one being done.
No, I've never heard of someone they said, this is our man. We want him to do this particular calling. All we need to do is wait for the background check. Oops, you got red flag. We're not going to be able to appoint you to that.
Yeah.
So that's really something that the church, especially not necessarily the elders quorum, probably not every single calling. If you're, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a calling here. If you're if you're the organist in the church, okay, you probably don't need to background check the organist, but the primary, the Sunday school, especially the Boy Scouts. I know the church doesn't do much in Boy Scouts anymore. Why aren't these positions background checked? Now, the answer is, well, we pray about the person, that the people who are selecting these individuals, they're praying about it and getting God's confirmation saying, okay, this is the person who needs to be in for this job. The problem is that those prayers don't seem to, they don't seem to encompass the prior history of this individual. Either that or they knew he was a registered sex offender and put him in anyway.
Exactly. Well, this is a situation where it's a little more grim than normal because there's several instances in all faiths where you have a predator that preys upon children, and someone's not a criminal. Someone is not necessarily considered a criminal until they've been caught. Correct.
Right.
But this is a situation that's a little different. This is a criminal who has been caught, who's served his time and has been released into the community, and so he relocated to a new area and then got put into this position where really there's only two ways of finding that out, and it looks like the church decided to, or at least the local church leaders decided to lean on the Spirit telling them whether this guy was worthy or not, instead of doing that with a background check.
Well, I'm all for all of the above. It's high time that the church really conforms to even what the basics of. These lawsuits from the church are millions and millions of dollars. When somebody gets abused and they're a former sex offender, we're talking about a $10 background check here. Yeah. I just wonder, why is the church gambling with? You can run. These are multi-million-dollar lawsuits. You can do an awful lot of background checks before you come up to that figure of the multi-million-dollar lawsuits.
Well, I think that the church is going to sooner or later have to own up to the fact that it's a church with a lot of imperfect people in it. And so the church needs to acknowledge that just because people are members of the church does not necessarily make them infallible and doesn't make them safe to be around even.
Right. I agree. Okay, let's move on to another article, and that's the new series that's coming along. It's Under the Banner of Heaven trailer starring Andrew Garfield, where he questions his faith. So this is going to be hitting Hulu here in just a couple of weeks. Based on the true crime bestseller by John Krakauer, it's a devout detective whose Mormon faith is put to the test as he investigates a brutal double murder that seems to be connected to an esteemed Utah family's spiral into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints fundamentalism. This is a very curious premise for a show. So if you look at if you watch the trailer, you'll see that they do. They have depictions of what happens inside of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints temples, including the endowment ceremony, including the initiatory ceremony, including Mormons wearing full temple garb. Most faithful LDS members consider that to be highly offensive and very, very inappropriate. What's interesting to me is that Andrew Garfield, who's the star, remember, he was the guy who did I think he was the second Spider-Man. That's what he's famous for. He was raised LDS. Okay. He was raised LDS, knows all about it. And when you look at his statements, they're not exactly, shall we say, Fox News fair and balanced. We'll just put it that way. He's got a bit of an axe to grind, it seems. And also the screenplay, who wrote the screenplay, he's the one who did the showrunner did the Big Love, that's the HBO series. He's the same guy who did Big Love. And he's also the same one who did a couple of other things. But both of these guys, in their statements, they're both former members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They both seem to have a pretty significant axe to grind. So I haven't watched. Obviously, the show has not been released yet, but it doesn't seem like it's going to be a real fair and balanced view of the church, especially when it says that they are spiraling into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints fundamentalism. What does that mean?
I remember, I'm not quite old enough to remember the details when the story came out. But this goes back to the 80s. I was alive, when it came out, but I wasn't living in the area. The area that occurred in, I believe, was down in American Fork in Utah County. And these brothers had gotten into some sort of when it talks about LDS fundamentalism, these guys were going to the mainstream, Brigham Young led LDS church, the church that we call the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints today. And so, and that's what it was called back in the 1980s. But these guys had gotten digging into like the past and a lot of the quotes from like the Brigham Young Journal of Discourses, the teachings of the prophet Joseph Smith. These guys had gotten into this fundamentalist point of view that, polygamy was always supposed to be a thing. And so they felt like they had a revelation that they were supposed to, kind of guide the church back to that. But really, this is with the point of view of the church to this. I think this was a case of the tail trying to wag the dog. And, these young men were wrong to try and lead the church from their position in American Fork. These guys weren't the leaders of the church. They didn't have any rights to tell the church where to go or how to behave or how to act. So they couldn't speak for the church at all. But this story, boy, it's heartbreaking. It involved murder. There was a lady that was killed as a result of this, and it got really nasty. I haven't read the book. I'm aware of the book, but when it comes to these stories that get put out onto a streaming service, let's see, they've had a couple of them come out. Abducted in Plain Sight was about an LDS family up in Pocatello, Idaho. And the way that one approached it, their LDS faith was part of what made them kind of quirky, but it wasn't really the cause or the driving force behind that story. I think that one's a good story for LDS people to watch, because it can help them understand that just because you're LDS and you go to church with friends and neighbors doesn't mean that those friends and neighbors might not be trying to prey on you and your family. Let's see, last year, the other one was the Mormon murders, the story of Mark Hoffman bombings.
Loved it.
And I think that one's a good one for LDS members to watch.
I think that was couldn't have been more fair and balanced if you had.
Absolutely.
That was absolutely brilliant.
So there are good examples out there, Dives, about the people who are LDS can see the church being represented in the media around them without the fear of the media trying to tear the church down. Because I know that let's see, what was the Dan Brown book that the Lost Symbol? When that one came out, I thought I had heard several people say it was anti-Mormon. I actually read the book. It mentions Joseph Smith once in one tiny little paragraph. He talks about Joseph Smith hunting for gold in New York, and by this they reference claiming they'd found gold plates.
He never did for gold in New York, but that's beyond the point.
Exactly.
he really did it, and he never found any gold. But that's beyond the point. That's what I mean to say. He never found any gold. But let me just ask you $1 million question that goes along with this.
Yeah.
Is it fair game to be showing inside of the temple the most sacred LDS ceremonies to an audience that is not prepared for them, doesn't really know what they're seeing, and when you have the showrunner and the star who have said specifically that they have real access to grind against the church? Is that fair?
Oh boy, this is the $1 million question, Dives. I don't have an axe to grind with the church on this issue. When it comes to the temple, I believe that the church has the right to their own secrecy, their own privacy. That being said, and being a temple member myself, not without getting into it too deeply, I think that there's certain things that it helps to see them in a different light. And what I mean by that is, if as a true believing member of the church, if you see things inside the temple, you're going to see them firsthand. Exactly, right? But you're not going to get a perspective of being a fly on the wall, like watching a video production of it. And so I think this can actually be a situation that can be good for the LDS people, that they can take a look at the temple rituals in a different setting and to see what what do they get right, what do they get wrong. My guess, if I was a heavily gambling man, I would put my money on that it's going to be pretty accurate.
You think so?
I think so, and I think it will be because of the things that we talked about earlier. The writing was done by somebody that knows what he's talking about, and the acting is done by somebody who's been there before. Yep. So I think they've got their ducks in a row on this one. I'll be interested to watch it myself and find out just how accurate it is. And if any of our true believing members out there are hesitant, don't want to get themselves into a situation, we'll follow this one too. After it comes out and I watch it, I'll come back and I'll tell you, hey, this is something that's probably going to hurt your feelings.
Okay. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens no matter what.
That's right.
What I think you also have, you got a same-sex. There's a news article about a same-sex support, Mormon same-sex support, which I found absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. Now I know you've got a lot of articles to go through still, so I'm just going to touch on this one. I don't know if we'll get to all of them. Yeah, exactly. I'm just going to touch on this one briefly, Dives. Okay. So it was remarkable that support within the LDS Church has doubled for members of the LGBTQ community. Doubled.
In how long?
Oh, I believe it was in 20 years, over the last 20 years. So
I read the article. It said only in the last 10, 2011.
In the last 10, that's even better.
In the last 10 years, it's doubled.
In the last 10 years, wow.
That is seismic.
And I think that what this comes about from is people have more interaction with those who are comfortable being out of the closet, being themselves. So,
and also, when the you remember half of the members of the church in the United States, when the Supreme Court legalized gay marriage, there's very little to fight for now.
Yeah, so it's a very friendly environment now right. for members of the LGBTQ community, and so as you get more and more people, they're feeling comfortable in their skin, feeling free to come out. They're having those conversations with their loved ones. They're having conversations with members of the church. And the members of the church are coming to find that, this person who I've always loved is, it's okay. That their lifestyle doesn't impact me in such a way that I need to even worry about it. So I think that this is I'll bet you our listeners out there have actually had these kinds of conversations with their loved ones, and they've come to terms with this whole thing, and then they've come to see that, why can't people just be people? I mean, people pondered their own navels on this and said, well, why am I heterosexual? Why am I not bisexual or transsexual or homosexual?
Right.
And so they've had to ask these questions. If is it just because God made me straight, or is it because I choose to be straight? Because I don't know that I necessarily chose to be straight. It's just how I am. Well, if I'm this way, is it possible that somebody can be different, and that's just the way that they came?
Yeah, one of the big things from this article that I found interesting is it showed all the religions, and it showed opposition to religiously based service refusals, meaning can I as a businessman refuse to serve gays, because gays are not a protected class according to the federal law. There's certain classes you cannot discriminate against. You can't discriminate against color, against sex, against race, against age, but gays are not a protected class. So you can discriminate against gays if you want to for services. And they ranked all of the different they ranked all the different religions: Muslims, Jewish, Buddhist, Hindu, Hispanic, Protestants, and Latter-day Saints were almost at the very most high, saying we shouldn't discriminate against LGBTQ even if we're legally allowed to do so.
That's a very different direction than the leadership has tried to steer the church. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, that is the understatement of the year.
Yeah.
Remember, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints used to fire women when they got pregnant. We were talking about, back in the 70s, back before that became outlawed. So, yeah, I mean, it's just we're seeing a seismic change here that, how long can the church hold out on these LGBTQ issues? It doesn't seem like it's going to be very long, because the next generation of leaders are the ones who are going to be believing what's in this survey.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the church has been, for a long time, just one generation away from change.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a step in the positive. I think it's a step in the right direction. So I think it'll continue, and the millennial generation, especially in the church, with the policy of exclusion back in 2015, which the church released for 3 years, which said that children of gay parents could not become members, could not receive a name, could not be baptized, could not participate fully, and then they repealed it in 2018.
Yeah, because that caused a lot of hate.
Huge backlash. In fact, the guy who runs the Quit Mormon website, which is a way to submit your resignation, said that he saw a spike like you wouldn't believe after that policy came out. Yeah. And I think the church, a 3-year revelation for the church, most of these revelations can take 150 years for change. We saw a 3-year change in the church's trajectory. That is unprecedented. That just doesn't happen. So I think you're seeing a big groundswell, and I think it's moving in the right direction. Okay, you're trying to keep this podcast to an hour. I've got a couple of other articles, and this one just came out as well. This is the Mormon Church. This is the Sydney Morning Herald on April 3rd. We should be saying the titles of it.
Yeah, that's right. The Sydney, Australia, right? This
Sydney Morning Herald. Mormon Inc. Church accused of multinational tax fraud. And this was led by Dr. Simon Southerton, who, are you familiar with Dr. Southerton? He's a former LDS bishop. He was also one who wrote the book Losing a Lost Tribe, about DNA and the Book of Mormon. He's a geneticist. Do you remember him? Anyway.
Yeah.
Yes, he's the one who he's basically a whistleblower of this, and it's an investigation about how the church-based church appears to have structured itself internationally to minimize its tax burden in Australia in a bad way. It says it's all smoke and mirrors thing, and that the church, who has a tax, we don't know, the church finances are extremely opaque, but in some countries, like Great Britain, like Canada, like Australia, if you're a tax-exempt religious entity, you have to disclose your finances. You can't do it like the United States, where we don't know how much the church has brought in. We don't know how much they're sending out. We don't know almost anything whatsoever, because it's all under a shroud of secrecy. That is not the case in Australia, Britain, and several other countries out there. So we have the church's records in Australia. So what they're saying here is that since 2015, the Australian adherents have said that they've been able to have $400 million in extra tax deductions that were not available to other religious denominations. This is a big whistleblower complaint. Now, the biggest thing in here, well, there's a couple of big things. They said that the church from 1985 to 2010 spent just $36,000 a year for the entire country on average. Only $36,000.
That's
the
it.
entire country of Australia. And we're talking about 61,000 members on average during that time frame, spending 50 cents per member in Australia.
Holy smokes.
I mean, we're talking about historically low levels of charitable givings. So they're saying that now the church receives $100 million in tithing donations every year in Australia. These numbers are public figures, as according to this, and that they are doing almost nothing good with it. They said LDS Charities Australia is saying that they is supposed to be the third largest contributor to Australia's charitable. According to a snapshot of charitable donations on Australia, LDS Charities Australia is supposed to be contributing $70 million. But they're saying, hey, we're not seeing this. There's no, I'm trying to look for the exact, it's shocking. This is how they said, it is shocking how little that they give.
That's, so did you say $70 million?
Yes.
So, and they're giving 36,000.
Right.
So that's what, 0.5%?
We're talking about very little. This is going in line with, remember the whistleblower Nielsen who brought forth the enzyme. He had the similar whistleblowing complaint where he said the church has a $100 billion investment arm that has $100 billion in reserve, which is mostly locked up in the stock market, and that they're not doing anything charitable with it whatsoever. That the only thing they've done with it in the last 20 years is that they built out an insurance company and they built the City Creek Mall. And we're seeing the same thing in this particular whistleblower complaint too, that says the church is stockpiling money. When people pay the $100 million a year, the Australians give 161,000 Australians give $100 million a year. That money is going to Salt Lake City, and it is not being used in Australia to alleviate suffering, the poor. And I'm trying to look for the quote in this article, but they said there's no orphanages that the church sponsors in Australia. There's very few bishop storehouses, and those are used on a very limited scale. There's no vaccine programs. There's no women, when women or other people have domestic violence issues, you could have homes where they could come and be safe. The church doesn't run any of those things in Australia.
Yeah, Dives, I'm involved with a lot of different, different charitable organizations that provide services to the community. And there's several ways for any charitable organization to give back. You've just mentioned a handful of them right off the top of your head, right? No wonder the Australian government is so angry about this.
The quote was, they don't set up schools, they don't set up hospitals, they don't have shelters, they don't have places for women to escape in their bad marriages. So what is this money going to? So you can
and that might fly here in the United States, where especially in our little fiefdom out here in the West.
Correct.
But in Australia, they won't be okay with that kind of opaqueness.
No, they won't.
They want transparency.
And you could say, okay, the Ensign Peak guy, that's just one whistleblower. It could be a one-off. Well, maybe he got it. Maybe he got it wrong. Maybe the whistleblower complained, even though he had a ton of documents and he really had a lot of information, hundreds and hundreds of documents. Maybe he just was a guy with an axe to grind. But we're starting to see that in multiple places where we're not seeing the charitable contributions that come from this tithe. Tithing is not generally, tithing, it appears, is used to build the kingdom of God on earth. It is not used to alleviate human suffering, to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked, and to visit the sick and afflicted.
Yeah, and there can be the argument to be said that, tithing isn't for that. That's what fast offerings and other donations are for. Well, that's okay, but where are the fast offerings going? Right. Are they being used? Are these offerings actually being used for it? And we trust that the church is doing that. But it sounds like Australia is not willing to just trust them, or at least shouldn't be willing to just trust them based off of what this whistleblower is saying.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. We'll see where that goes. We're still working. We're still waiting to see what the fallout is of the Ensign Peak whistleblower, because that was a whistleblower complaint to the IRS. And by the way, when you are a whistleblower to the IRS, you get a whistleblower a percentage of whatever it is that you're whistleblowing, because they want to make it worth your while. So if the church,
so this guy could be taken care of very well.
This guy could be the most wealthy. The most wealthy Mormon, by the way, who just resigned from the church only 6 months ago. He was a big time tech guy. I forget his name. He moved to California. He was worth $6 billion, but and the Sorensen guy, he's only worth.
Hey everybody, it's D-Vase here. Thanks so much for listening to the Mormon News Roundup. If you haven't heard about Anchor by Spotify, it's the easiest way to make a podcast with everything you need all in one place. Allow me to explain. Anchor has the tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. When hosting on Anchor, you can distribute your podcast on listening platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. It's everything that you need to make a podcast all in one place. And best of all, Anchor is totally free. So download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
There's only a Huntsman and Sorensen. Those guys are only worth about $2 billion. But if this whistleblower goes through and he gets 10%, we could be looking at the most wealthy Mormon in the world.
Yeah, certainly. Well, for $150+ billion corporation, and that's just in the one arm.
That's the one. There could be multiple investment arms. We don't know.
We don't know, and that's the problem. Is that I know the church publishes its financials along with conference. That they say, oh well, this is our audit of what's going on, but that from what the whistleblower said about the Ensign Peak, that audit is not as straightforward and transparent as it's supposed to be. So I guess we'll see how this whole thing pans out. This is going to be an interesting news story to watch.
It will be. Obviously, Simon Southerton, let's just be very clear, he does have an axe to grind. He was this is back in the day. He was excommunicated from the church for adultery, but he said that was a farce and that he was excommunicated from the church because he's the one who really brought forth the DNA and the Lamanites and the Book of Mormon, showing that that the DNA does not work out. He says that's the reason that he was excommunicated. So the person who brought this complaint, though, he definitely has an agenda.
Interesting. Yeah, this is going to be really interesting to follow and see what the outcome is.
Right. Do you have any other news articles that you want to go through?
Oh, I think I've done all the ones that I'm really up on. I had one about this conspiracy guy, but it's kind of garbage. First of all, the guy was fundamentalist, so it's one of those polygamous tiny offshoots that. Well, and his conspiracy theory really wasn't all that interesting. But let's you have several more. Go ahead.
Well, that brings up a good point. We are going to be focusing this podcast on the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, even though it is Mormon News Roundup. Now, that is not to say that we will not cover other. We won't be covering the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who's now renamed themselves to the Community of Christ. They have 250,000 members, or the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which has about 10,000 members, or any of the other Mormon-related. It's hard to say sects or offshoots or others. We certainly will be covering any Mormon news we want to cover, but we're certainly going to be, since 99% of all Mormons are adherents to the Church of Jesus, of the Brighamite sect. That's named after Brigham Young, Brighamite. We're going to be focusing on that for sure, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so, like these fundamentalists, the term Mormon, really, I would apply it to anybody who believes that Joseph Smith was a prophet, and that includes all of the sects that shot off at one point or another.
I think that's a good. I've never heard that definition. That is a fabulous definition for who should be a Mormon. Now, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints wants to have the exclusive term when they release their guidance to the Associated Press.
Yeah,
they say, "Hey, we're the only Mormons. None of the rest of these guys are Mormons."
Well, and because that didn't work, that's why they tried to get rid of the whole Mormon word 2 years ago. But that's the definition that I've given to the term Mormon, is anybody who claims to be a follower of Joseph Smith, because that's as far back as it really goes. I mean, that's when the term was coined. That's when it came about. That's where it came from. And really, anybody that calls themselves a Mormon believes that they're following Joseph Smith.
Right. I think that's good. This is General Conference weekend. So So, you would think that, hey, this is the first time. First of all, we haven't had an in-person general conference in 3 years.
True.
Okay. So this is the first time now they had limited. We obviously do an entire podcast on the news that comes out of that.
Yeah.
Potentially. But this is the first time they've had a conference in 3 years. Now, they had limited seating in there. They only had 10,000 people per session when the conference center holds 21,000. So it is still limited. So some of the news that came, it is hard to find news that comes out of these conferences.
Yeah.
And there just isn't that much, because these conferences are, honestly, if you turn one in and you were to mix the tape up with something that occurred back in the 70s or even the 60s, you would barely be able to tell the difference.
That's a really good point you make, D-Bays. I know that, I don't follow general conferences closely as when I was an active member, but I still follow it because it does pertain, or it applies to, living out here in the West. I interact with LDS people frequently on a daily basis. So it, like you said, or like we said at the beginning of this podcast episode, this is just a way for me to be a part of my community. So, when it comes to general conference, I wish that it was a little bit more changed up, or that they had a different type of a theme or something, because you're exactly right. They all run together. They all sound the same. It seems like that the topics never change.
It is. So this is what general conference could be. It could be the only news that really comes out of general conference is locations of temples.
Yeah.
We're going to build temples in X, Y, and Z. And President Nelson has been extremely very, very active in announcing temples. Not quite as much in actually building those temples.
Yeah, he's definitely taken a lot of inspiration from his predecessor Gordon B. Hinckley,
right?
Because he really flooded the earth with temples the way that Ezra Taft Benson was flooding the earth with the Book of Mormon.
Correct.
And now Russell M. Nelson seems really eager to flood the earth with big temples, to get rid of the mini temples that they were doing, and start doing the big ones again, and do them frequently and everywhere.
There's no reason.
You're right. We have a huge list of temples that have yet to have ground broken on them.
Right.
In places like Russia or China, those governments are not open yet. Right. So I think a lot of it's wishful thinking. But there's certainly a lot of the ones in Utah are going to get built. I'll tell you that.
There's already 29 temples in Utah. One wonders you can barely swing a dead cat by the tail without hitting a temple ground in Utah. 29 temples, and there's only so much inhabited space in Utah. Half of it is Dugway, and the other half of it is wilderness way out in the middle of nowhere. So. So some of the news, we'll just keep it brief here. Some of the news that came out of this general conference, first of all, they released their statistics for the first time in a while.
Oh.
And what the statistics showed was a growth rate of the church of 0.8, not 0.8%, 0.8%. So this isn't exactly it's better than a shrinkage, I suppose, but it's not exactly the stone cut out of the mountain that Daniel saw in King Nebuchadnezzar in the Old Testament. That stone, as Joseph Smith said, that stone was supposed to be cut out of the mountain without hands and was supposed to roll forth to fill the earth.
Yeah, like a snowball effect.
That is correct. But
this is not a snowball.
No, sir, it is not a snowball. Let me tell you, Al, look, the global population is increased. What we didn't realize is that mountain that the stone is rolling down, that mountain is actually getting larger by the day.
Yeah,
because the global population continues to increase. Now, the global population is increasing at about 1.6% per year. So this is a couple years in a row of the church, of that stone, which is supposed to be rolling down. It is not rolling down because it is not gaining ground to get to the bottom. It's actually the mountain. There's more terrain below the stone for the last couple of years than there is on stone going down. Does that make sense? Because it's not gaining on the global population.
You're right. That's a really good point.
Yeah, so we're not so the statistics to say that they are a disappointment. I would say that they're generally a disappointment. And You can blame COVID for that. There's absolutely no doubt, but that's
Yeah.
some of the news that came out. Hey, we got to see that. Number two, in the leadership session of General Conference, not the priesthood session, the leadership session of General Conference. That is what occurs on Thursday night. That is not available to you and me. That is not available to the regular member. That is only available to senior leaders. It's not broadcast. There's no transcripts. That's really, I don't believe that there's any transcripts. I've never read the leadership session.
Yeah. So is the leadership session something new?
No, they've always had that. It's where all the general authorities, from the area authorities all the way up to all 12 quorums of the area authorities, all of the 89, 70 of the regular general authorities, the 15 apostles, the 70, first quorum of the 70, second quorum of the 70, presiding bishopric, all these guys come in for the leadership session. That's before conference. And, they announced 46 new area authority 70s during that session. That is hardly news. But I think what that shows to me is that, and they also, in the regular session, they called about 6 new general authorities. In general, it appears that the church turns over about 10% of its area authority 70s and 10% of its regular general authority 70s per year. Because remember, these folks, all men, by the way, all men are... these men are put out to pasture. Once they hit 70, they're put into emeritus status. Yeah. So there's something like 500 of these guys, and you have to replace about 10% of them. That's about 50 per year. So, I mean, that came out of conference as well.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a lot to chew on.
Yes, and they replaced the General Relief Society presidency, all 3, and they replaced the general primary presidency. They have full changeover of the female leadership. You have 6 female leaders in the church, and that is balanced out by, if you could count all 12 quorums of the area authority 70s, 500 men. So we're talking about a 100 to 1 ratio.
Yeah, this is heavily lopsided.
That is hugely lopsided.
Yeah. And of course, the church will justify this by saying that these are priesthood positions. So, you have to be a holder of the priesthood and have to be male to hold the priesthood in order to have one of these positions, except for the 6 female positions, which is the presidency of the Relief Society and the presidency of the primary.
Yeah. And it seems like they've avoided, this is a very tame conference. They are attempting to avoid all controversies. There's been very, very little ripples of anything, of misstatements, of missteps, of anything. It just seems to be, if you look at the summaries and I've watched some of this conference much more than in previous time, in the previous times, but they're looking for a very cautious approach, a very, just a very safe. This is our, the first general conference in a couple of years. We're just keeping things very safe, very cautious. Let's not rock the boat. Let's just, the ABC News says Mormon stresses unity amid polarization. We're just looking for a unifying conference. Let's not rock the boat. President Nelson addressed the Ukraine thing, but he did so in extremely, very safe language. It's just a very, very, there's just never much news. Now, we're about to wrap this up because I think we're reaching about the end, but what could General Conference news be like? That's what I would love to imagine for myself. Let's pretend what General Conference news could really look like. So they could address some of the doctrinal questions that have perturbed us as Latter-day Saints for 2 centuries. Why is it that women can't have the priesthood? Let's ponder on that. Let's get the answer. Or hey, when does life begin? Does it begin at conception? Does it begin at 3 weeks in? When does it begin? What is the Lord's plan for using stem cells? Remember, stem cells are often used from fetuses, some of which are aborted fetuses, which is some people's problems with vaccines and things like that, which I think is somewhat irrational, but let's not get into that. Hey, this is the Lord's view on stem cells. This is when we should use them. This is when we shouldn't use them. Yeah. Let's also let's ponder on there's so many subjects out there that, hey, we don't have the answers to these subjects. And we are supposed to be led by revelation. The Lord is supposed to be leading this church. We could be having new insights into all of these old conundrums that the church has had that we don't have answers to.
Boy, wouldn't that be something?
That's news.
Yeah.
Well, we could be revealing, moving forward the ball. There's answers to questions that people have. Has the Lord revealed every answer to virtually every doctrinal question that's out there? I sure hope not.
Oh, obviously he hasn't.
Oh,
Otherwise people wouldn't have questions.
we could also be presenting new, instead of just having proclamations, which are, by the way, a fancy word for the word creeds, which Joseph Smith hated, by the way. In the first vision, Jesus told Joseph that creeds are an abomination, but we have proclamations, which are just souped up creeds. We could present those proclamations to the membership, have them vote on it and ratified, and have them canonized.
Sure.
We could have all sorts of new revelations, just like the reorganized church. Their DNC goes up to like 190 or something like that. Every conference, they're ratifying new revelations, new doctrine. They're doing things. They're making news.
Well, and as far as the world stage goes, I mean, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has been on the world stage for 200 plus years, or just about 200 years, I guess. We're coming up on that. But this is about where the Catholic Church was when they started to release their creeds. When they had their council at Nicaea, and these creeds started to come out. So time-wise, boy, this would fit right alongside with it.
That's a great point.
Yeah, I mean, because going forward, I know that there's several members of the church that I've talked to on a frequent basis. They're very convinced that the second coming is right around the corner. We're right on the cusp of the millennium, and but in the event that doesn't occur in the next 100 years, we need to keep keeping on. We got to keep moving forward. We still have to live in this world, in this society. So this would actually be a good idea, I think, as far as keeping all of the members of the church on the same page.
Yep. Let's present the proclamation of the family for sustaining vote, and let's canonize it.
That's right.
Let's make some news here. Okay, the other news that could come out of General Conference, imagine this. The church has decided to, I'll just give you some examples that I've been thinking about this week. The church has decided to partner with the World Health Organization, that they're going to donate $500 million to the eradication of polio. The church is going to take this to the front, and we are going to be the ones to eliminate polio off of the face of the earth. We're going to pledge $500 million, and in 3 years, polio is going to be gone.
Good for them.
Or the church has said, you know what, we are going to eliminate world hunger. And I've seen the numbers on the elimination of world hunger. They say that it can be done with $10 billion. They are going to dip into Ensign Peak. And they say, we are going to end world hunger. We're going to build soup kitchens all throughout Africa, all throughout all of these countries.
We don't even have to go that far, D-Vase. I mean, there's people here in the United States going hungry. There's people in my neighborhood and your neighborhood going hungry. We aren't aware of them.
That's correct. We're going to end world hunger, or we are going to have a ton of money that we're going to put towards vaccines, or we're going to partner with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to have microloans for people in Sri Lanka so that they can pull themselves out of the poverty situations that they're in. There's so much news that the church could make using their vast resources. We're going to start a chain of orphanages in Canada. We're going to dedicate 300 orphanages. We are going to be the orphanages of choice in Canada. We're going to stock these with senior missionaries who are going to take care of these needy children. We're going to divert it away from the missionary. We're going to take 1,000 missionaries a year, divert them away from proselyting, have all these orphanages, and we're going to end the foster home problem in Canada. I'm just giving you a list of the things that the church has the ability to do right now that could make an incredible difference to the people on this earth and would be real news.
Yeah, and it would, boy, can you imagine what these kids would feel like if they came home from a mission where they had gone and worked, in a soup kitchen or in an orphanage or in a school or a hospital somewhere, instead of volunteering 2 years of their life to go and knock on doors, just have those same doors that have been slammed in every other missionary's face before them. I mean, really, you could keep your proselyting force going, but divert a bunch of that onto some charitable service missions.
Well, Al, now that you mention that, look, the church also releasing their statistics. They have 60,000 proselyting missionaries now.
Yes.
They have 30,000 service missionaries.
Yeah, so it's growing.
So it is that aspect is growing, but a lot of these service missionaries are, look, one of my missionaries that I was a companion for, we got to wrap this up, but one of my missionaries I was a companion for, he had special needs. He probably shouldn't have been a regular missionary. He was probably just not quite up for it. He finished his mission as a service missionary. And you know what he did for his service mission? He spent the rest of his mission baptizing people for the dead in an LDS temple.
Wow.
So a lot of these service missionaries are called to do things that really don't have an impact to people in this life at this time. They are doing indexing, which is genealogy work. They are baptizing people for the dead. They are doing things that are not necessarily that don't have a real impact on people today. And church could make real news at these general conferences by really changing their focus instead of on. See, the church's focus has always been building up the kingdom of God on earth, building the kingdom. That's what this tithing money is for. It's not for feeding the sick, doing the hungry, and all that other stuff. That's we can do that, but we are in the business of kingdom building, and temples are kingdom building. Soup kitchen and orphanages, that's not kingdom building.
Yeah, I sure wish that we could figure out a way to convince the church that is exactly what kingdom building is, though, because what's in a kingdom besides the king? I mean, what's the point of having a kingdom if you don't have any people that can get by or survive to pay the taxes? And I mean, I'm just using the metaphor, not to say that tithing is a tax per se, but to, if you keep extracting the tithing out of the membership and they're going hungry, but you don't provide the soup kitchen where they can go and get a meal. I mean, they do have the Bishop Storehouse, but as anybody that's grown up on Bishop Storehouse will tell you, they get real sick of Honey Nut Cheerios and peanut butter and sharp cheddar cheese in a hurry.
Well, I treasured all of my service in the Bishop Storehouse. That's one of my favorite callings that not calling, but that's one of my favorite service opportunities that I.
Well, sure, because it's one of the few callings where there's actually some tangible good,
correct,
right there in front of you that you can see.
That is right. I think we're going to leave it there. We have covered a bit of the news programs. We're going to be keeping a sharp eye out on the news on what's happening out there. I hope that everyone out there that's listening to this first podcast, it's only going to get better from here. Okay, so we're going to get better at this. We're still learning how to do this, but we're very excited about this topic. Eventually, like I said, we're going to have a website where we're going to be able to engage with you. We're going to post these podcasts on the website. There'll be a discussion boards below it where people can discuss. People can submit articles to us. In the meantime, thank you for letting us, talk about have ruminations on the great and spacious beehive. And we want to thank you so much for listening.
Yep, and join us next week.
When it comes to nicknames of the church, such as LDS Church, the Mormon Church, to remove the Lord's name from the Lord's church is a major victory for Satan.
Satan.
Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm a being with no moral constraints. My number one goal is to hurt the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.